I don't know whether to sing or dance. Thank you, Steffi, for that very generous introduction. Thank you, Maria, Marcel, Hubert, for making this conference possible. I'm 62 years old. I have been speaking in many audiences for over 30 years of my life. And I have to tell you, the difference that you can make is that this is media-driven, so that the message from this conference can be sent in more avenues and platforms than is normally possible in a conference. So I applaud you for making this happen. So please, applause for our organizers. You know, when we talk about women and leadership, we often talk about what's not there. And there's a reason for doing so. Let me show you. There are only 19 women who serve as presidents or prime ministers among the 192 member nations of the United Nations. The most recent was the president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff. So when she got elected, a friend of mine said, "My God, Irene, women are taking over." I told her, "Get over it." That's what we're talking about. 10%. We're running the world? Excuse me. Maybe in Germany and Brazil, two very large economies, you know, it may seem as if we are, but we aren't. Now, in my home country, the United States, let's look at how many CEOs. 12 women CEOs among the 500 largest companies as ranked by Fortune magazine. Admittedly, they run big companies, DuPont, Xerox, PepsiCo, Archer Daniels Midland. But you know what? This is what it looks like. This little bitty sliver. So, you know, so people say, "Oh my God, women have really made it. We don't have anything to talk about." Get over it. Now, when we look at women on corporate boards, equally pathetic. Outside of Norway, that does have 40.3% of women on its boards because of a quota, and Sweden, which is around 23%, the rest of the world has nothing to talk about. It's under 20%. Take a look at that. Whether it is Europe, which actually leads at 12.2%, down to the Middle East, there's nothing to talk about. This is not a story where there's a hero or a heroine. And it is this kind of message that seems to indicate we aren't there. Now, while these numbers are accurate, they don't actually capture the essential economic impact that women have made and that should be made evident to governments and companies so that they promote women to leadership roles. To do so, we need to shift our discourse to a different language. So we talk about women not as economically vulnerable and absent from leadership, but to talk about women as economically valuable, to shift our focus from economic need that seems to represent women globally to economic power, which they really have, but which they may not really know. Well, how do we do that? Well, very simply, we talk about women as important stakeholders who are essential to every country's economy and every company's profitability. First of all, women are the 21st century labor force, okay? We are going to depend on women in the future. Right now, 40 to 50% of the global labor force is female. Women have always worked, but now we're getting paid for it. If you were to add women who work in the informal sector in emerging economies, that percentage is even much higher. The jobs of the future will be in the service sector where women tend to dominate. So the companies that train and promote women into leadership roles will be the ones who will succeed. Let us also remember that women are the majority of farmers in the world. They produce 50% of the food products globally on land in which only 1% own it. That is truly pathetic. But they are the ones who are going to make sure that we have food on our table. Secondly, as women's income has risen, because now we're getting paid for it, their consumer buying strength, as Marcel pointed out earlier, has really increased. So that now in developed economies, we are the majority of consumers, as has been said repeatedly. But something that women have yet to absorb and understand and use. In the United States, for instance, the majority of car buyers are women, 60%. Did you know that? Which means that they buy gasoline, they buy tires, they buy car insurance, they buy services. So I don't understand why car companies put a half-naked woman on a car and think that's the way to buy the cars. Not only are women buying for themselves and their families, they're buying for the businesses they own and for the places of work where they happen to be the purchasing agents. Did you know that in the US, the majority of purchasing agents are now female, and they're buying not just paper clips, they're buying consulting services, they're buying raw materials. A friend of mine who was vice president of procurement for FedEx said to me, you know, Irene, the only thing I don't buy are the planes. I buy everything else. So don't make fun of women shopping, because what we decide to buy will determine the future profitability of any company in the world. Remember that. Thirdly, the number of women entrepreneurs in the world has risen dramatically, so that in the US and in Europe, 1 out of 3 small businesses is now owned and run by women. If you were to add micro-entrepreneurs, 80% of whom happen to be women, women are the growth sector in small business ownership. Why is that important? Because small business is the foundation of every economy in the world, including in my country. Right now, new employment growth in the United States is only coming from small businesses. And guess what? The majority of drivers of small business in my country are women. They generate $1.3 trillion worth of revenues yearly, and they hire 8 million people combined. Until that data came out from the Center for Women's Business Research in the US, nobody was paying attention. Now banks are paying attention and governments are paying attention. So this kind of business growth drove the managing director of the International Finance Corporation of the World Bank to say that the best stimulus for economic recovery worldwide is to foster women's entrepreneurship globally. That's a very compelling statement, but it comes from the fact that small business growth is the biggest driver of women's economic progress globally. Fourth, according to Credit Suisse, women now control 1/3 of the world's wealth. Did you know that? Or roughly $20.2 trillion, and it's supposed to grow by 8% annually until 2014. So what does this all amount to? Women are not only bringing home the bacon, as we say in the US, we're creating jobs not only for ourselves, but for the businesses that we are part of. We are also fueling local and national economies, not only by what we decide to purchase, but also in the companies in which we decide to invest. So what this means is that women's economic activities have become fundamental to the global economy, not at the top where we're clearly absent, but at the base of every economy in the world, as half of the world's workers, as the majority of its consumers, and as the growing ranks of entrepreneurs and investors globally. So what happens when nations don't engage women fully in their economies? This is what it looks like. According to Goldman Sachs, if women were fully employed and utilized in several countries, it would raise the gross domestic product of the United States by as much as 9%, by the Eurozone for 13%, emerging markets at 14%, and Japan at 16%. And Lord knows Japan could use that kind of economic growth, especially now after the giant earthquakes. So the language in which to speak of women's economic impact actually articulates what's called the business case at the macro level. Newsweek magazine in 1998 gave a term for this. They called it womenomics, and it referred to the feminization of the global economy. And then, the Financial Times picked up that term and several others since then. Now, as to the business case for corporations, many of you are probably familiar with a McKinsey study and Catalyst that showed that the more women on boards and the more women in senior management, the greater is the profitability of a company. What you probably did not realize is how much study has been done over a decade on this same idea of the business case. Take a look. Look at that. In all of these countries since 2000, studies have been made as to the business case for including women. In the US, it began as early as 2000, and look, Canada as well. Emerging economies like Vietnam and Turkey have done similar studies. And in Europe, every major economy has also done one. And with Finland having the biggest base, 12,000 companies were studied. And what is amazing about all of this came from a report we did on accelerating board diversity, is that it doesn't matter how many companies were surveyed, in any country, the result was exactly the same. The more women in senior leadership roles spells greater profitability for a company. So if you were to take this and look at it, you say, we don't need any more studies. We don't need any more research to show we're valuable. It's already there. Unfortunately, we need to articulate the business case, all of us in this room and those in the media, because it's a message that is not yet acted upon fully. There was another McKinsey study recently of 1,500 senior executives in several countries. And what it showed, unfortunately, fortunately, 65% of them accept and affirm the business case. They intellectually understand it. Unfortunately, only 29% of them act on it. Unfortunately, we have 2 of those CEOs in this room. We need more of them. We need more CEOs who not only understand the business case, but actually bring it as a business imperative. Many companies now still see diversity, gender diversity, as a soft issue, as opposed to be an integral component of their business strategy. Which leads me to quotas. Europe is now leading the way in changing the face of corporate boardrooms globally. And it's through mandated legislation, through quotas, which is not now depending on incrementalism for a CEO or a nominations committee chair to see the light, but rather through compliance with a government mandate. Let me show you how many countries are now doing it. Take a look. It began with Norway, right? 40.3%. They got the ball rolling, got it done, followed by Spain and Iceland, France since last winter, the Netherlands a month ago, Belgium. I met with the Belgian senator who's the author of the bill, and she said in 2 weeks they are passing it. And look at Italy. Italy, 3.5% of board seats held by women. So they passed in the lower house a quota bill, 30%. You know what they call it in Italy? Le quota rosa, the pink quota. And it's just, it fits them. And anyway, if you were to add the countries, if you were to add Malaysia, congratulations. Yes, yeah. See, we have Malaysia over here as proposed quota. Well, thank goodness to the leadership of the minister who's with us, and you're lucky to have her here. She will move over there and it covers not only state-owned companies, but listed companies. The first in Asia and the first for a Muslim country. Remember that. If you were to add quotas for state-owned companies. And you say, well, what is that? We're talking about government-owned companies, energy, oil, airlines, okay? Israel, 1993, 1/3 of board seats must be held by women. 1996 in South Africa, okay? Then Denmark, Finland, Ireland, Iceland, and most recently, since last month, Austria. Germany, as Maria said, doesn't have a quota. But look, Berlin and Nuremberg, the cities, actually have quotas for companies that are based there or who have municipal equity. They have quotas, and it was driven by 2 outstanding mayors. Quebec, you know, the part of Canada that always wants to break away and say we're not part of Canada. Guess what? They have a quota for 50% of companies that are based in the province. They are now at 42%. Okay? That's why the face of boards in many countries will now change, largely driven by Europe. Madam Zimmerman, she's the author, co-author of the bill in France, said, goodwill and good works are no longer enough. Quotas are a top-down strategy. The bottom-up strategy, which we've used for a long time, hasn't worked in bringing women to leadership roles, hence quotas. Now, the private sector in many countries are not very happy about these mandates, although some corporate governance and stock exchanges are now including gender diversity as a component of good corporate governance. And these are the countries that now have language that say that it is important to have gender diversity either as a component of being listed in the stock exchange, as Australia is doing, or to use it as a guideline for how a company should be run. Now, equally unhappy are women who say women should be appointed based on their talents and not according to a quota. When I'm being very kind, I say to them that quotas are an intermediate step that is needed to give women access to leadership roles. Sodexo's CEO, Michel Landel, said that this is a jolt to the system that's necessary in order to move the numbers. The women who are appointed as part of quotas still have to perform. You still have to do your work. And it is not any company who could just put women there in order to make the numbers go the right way. So, all of the strategies that I mentioned to you are now happening. But it's important for all of you to carry this message. It is not enough for you to say, things aren't going in our direction. And don't just look to government and business to fix it. We have to begin with us. We have to create pressure for change to happen. And we have to come up with ideas for how that change should be. As Maria had said earlier, for instance, in creating images in which women are indeed in the lead. Lastly, bring another woman behind you. It isn't enough to achieve. You have to help somebody else to achieve. Lady Astor, the first woman in the British House of Commons, once said, "There's no point blaming the men. We made them." So it's up to us, the makers of men, to become responsible. Thank you.